today is Airplane Tales, the Homefront edition, 1941 to 1945, with Jim and Connie Coulthart. Jim is a local aviation historian specializing in World War II aviation throughout our region. You may remember him from his prior program on the history of Mohawk Airlines, so he's something of a frequent flyer here. Connie is the former Oneida City historian and has a passion for women's role in American life. So without further ado, let us welcome our speakers, Jim and Connie.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mike. Before I hand it over to my better half here, this idea of the program came out of a lot of research that I did with my 12 plus presentations. There was a lot of information about the domestic and the states side of things. And so that's when Connie said, hey, maybe we could do something together. So I'm going to let her have the first go around here on the presentation.
You want to help me?
I can, hold on. Slideshow from beginning. All right, that's all I got to do is that. Okay. All right. And here's the microphone so people can hear you.
Okay, I speak softly, so if you don't hear me, tell me to speak up. Well, things were just starting to feel a little bit more normal, I think, prior to the war. The depression was starting to ease up. People were enjoying a little more of the day-to-day goods and so on, because unfortunately business picked up when war in Europe started. There was a lot of ambiguity about whether or not we should get involved. Some people thought so, some people didn't. But then came December 7th, 1941. And I was thinking about it, and I think probably the closest thing in my lifetime would be the bombing of the Twin Towers and how we felt that day. That's not something you like to bring back to feeling, but it was frightening. It was shocking. We were angry. All these emotions. This is not the same, but those emotions are. What it did for us, because we knew it was coming to us. We knew what was coming, was a determination. And this determination was felt throughout the population. Not just the soldiers that were getting ready to go to war, because that's the ultimate sacrifice, but all of the families that were at home. Life was pretty simple back then. You know, I would have been a homemaker. My grandmothers were homemakers in Utica. My McNamara grandmother had 5 sons. And if you had 5 sons, I bet you were plenty concerned. I had one uncle that went into the Navy, one that went into the Army, one that went into the Coast Guard. I think there was another Army, and my father had rheumatic fever as a child, was not able to participate in that way. But both he and his father worked in the munitions factory in Utica. So, and on the other side of my family, I had a lot of girls, and they were in the mills. And the mills began to produce things for the war effort, which is what Jim's going to talk about. But we had to stop and think, how can we all participate? And that's what I want to talk about. Our lives were changed. To meet the wartime needs, we had to take the skills that we had, realize that they were useful, excuse me, in the outside world, out of our homes. Okay, beyond the usual household tasks, now women had to consider a complicated rationing system to manage resources, which I'll talk about in a minute. They had to create nutritious meals with very, at times, limited resources. Well, that's a challenge, I can tell you. Of course, some of the people, as was pointed out to me by someone earlier today, their mother was raised during the Depression, so she had a head start. But it was still difficult. So you were urged to conserve and save useful scraps. I have a few things to look at up front. The Victory Garden was encouraged. There was a Victory Garden at the White House. If you could not have a Victory Garden, you could work in a community garden or help your neighbor. Particularly, I found in New Hartford, there was a pig club. You went together with a bunch of people and you bought a pig. And that allowed you to have meat that was not rationed. There was a lot of help from newspapers, advertisers, and clubs that gave you ideas for recipes, some of which are up there. I wish I could say they sounded good, but not so much. It's a small price to pay, though, when you're worried about your husband, your father, your son, your brother. And there were women as well. There were women in the nursing. There were women who went to serve in the canteens with the Red Cross. So everybody was involved. And the general theme, as you can see, kids are there. There's a Victory Garden. The kids would have seed clubs and sell seeds for the war effort. Make do and mend. The theme here is the troops come first. Volunteers mended uniforms. Red Cross and ladies' clubs were big in organizing these things. Clothing was not rationed, but shoes were. You were allowed to have one pair per year. And you're reminded, you have better things to do with your money. You can buy war bonds. You are encouraged to cut down clothes or remake clothes. There's some of the fashions up front. Men's suits got cut down, and there were recommendations for the changes to be made, and partly it was for practicality because you don't want baggy pants in a factory. You're not going to wear a dress in a factory. And the women were going to come and do the work that the men could not do because they were at war. Styles changed, as I said, to accommodate the changing roles that women wore pants and jumpsuits for the first time. There was no use of excessive frills, buttons, those things would be dangerous, and the materials could be better used. At this time, dresses became shorter and silhouettes became narrower. Again, use less material. Ties fasteners were more often used because we don't want to use elastic. Menswear also was streamlined, no more cuffs. And people certainly didn't follow all of this, but generally speaking, this was the expectation, and however involved you were, you embraced that. Pockets were another thing that were kind of out. There was consequences for abusing the rationing system. I found in the Utica paper a notification that 2 people had their gas ration books revoked. They had to turn them in because they were caught using their gasoline for other than an essential purpose. So their names were printed, and they got fines, and their books were taken away. And it's, it seemed to be that it wasn't just some people that would be held to account. There was a doctor that was caught having a pleasure excursion with his vehicle, and he suffered the same fate. Right, rationing was put into place so that there would be some fairness to it. Whoops, I think we've got a slide on a spot.
Keep going.
Okay, these are some instructions that were handed out by the Red Cross to women who were interested and had skills in knitting, and they would teach you how to knit if you didn't know how, to help with some items. So, and it also gave you the sensation, you're contributing, which was important. The Red Cross did a lot of special things, and one of the things they did was assemble kit bags for the soldiers. And I found a nice article about a Little Falls gentleman who was a sailor who had got his kit when he was aboard his ship. And a lot of people wondered, well, where does my stuff go? Do they really want it? Is it appreciated? And yes, it is appreciated. This letter that they sent said, I received this at Christmas time, and all the boys liked them very much. It was something from home. I was inducted at Utica. It says you were doing great work. Can you imagine if you put like hundreds of these things together? It must have been nice to hear that someone local appreciated it. The kits contained razor blades, pencils, writing paper, polishing cloths, pins, needles, hard candy, cards, and a detective or other novel. So a little something to brighten their day. Now we get to rationing. There is a ration book up there if you want to look at it. And an interesting point is that the little folder that's with it, you had to hang on to these. And the folder you could keep it in, as very often was from a grocery store or somebody advertising something. So that is also in that package. The system was entirely run locally. The rules and regulations came from the federal government, but the people that actually ran the program locally were all people you would know and volunteers. Nobody got paid to do this. And it wasn't, I don't think, a very fun job. You would have to go to somewhere like a school. It would be advertised where you needed to go to fill out the form to get your initial ration book. And they changed frequently. They changed frequently. The colors, what was on them, so that people could cheat. And the stamps had to be torn out of the store. If the stamp was already torn out, it was no good. If you went to a hospital for more than 10 days, you had to take your book with you, surrender it to the hospital. Gas rationing was a big thing. And it was set up with classifications, A, B, and C. C being essential, which very few people got, and a few others. You got extra if you worked in an essential job like a doctor, nurse. But it was interesting to me that people knew and people watched to make sure you were doing the right thing. One gentleman asked for an exception. You could ask for an exception. And he said that he collected time payment plans for a jewelry store, and he needed the extra gas so he could collect. He was told to take the bus. Okay, and the gas rationing I had found was important, but it was also to discourage the overuse of rubber. Because at that time there was no good synthetic substitute. There's your stamps, so you can see. As a matter of fact, before rationing started, there was a declaration form where you were supposed to tell them what you had on hand. That was taken into consideration.
Where was that one from?
That was from the Clinton Courier. Okay, everybody got in on that act. Tippy the dog gave up his rubber toy. Scrap rubber was a big issue. It took 8 sets of license plates to equal 1 gun, to make 1 gun. An old shovel, 4 hand grenades. So how really effective this was in all areas, I have my doubts. But it gave everybody a sense of participation. Everybody could do something. This one reminds us to think about what we're doing, what we have, taking care of it, so that we don't have to deplete resources. Okay, I think everybody knows what's in the upper left-hand corner there? Anybody? It's milkweed. And children collected milkweed because the material that went into life vests was made from something called K-pop. I may not be saying it right. But it needed to be, because it came from the Pacific, and we couldn't get it anymore, so that was useful, and it was used. Okay. More scrapping on a large scale. Towns would compete with one another. Kids got in on the act. They would collect the milkweed, and they would also have an opportunity to buy war stamps at school. And when your book was filled out of stamps, and they were, of course, in minor amounts, you eventually got a savings bond. So even children got to be part of the savings bond. A very interesting story was, there were several from New Hartford, where one boy remembers that you could only sign up for 1 piece of candy at the candy store. They kept trying to sign your name in the book because everything was rationed. The basic food groups. It was time consuming for women to try and create these nutritious meals. It was the rise of cold cereal, because you're going off to the factory or you're whatever. You're just gonna have a quick breakfast and you're gonna get out of the house. And bag lunches became a thing. And convenience foods to a certain extent. Kraft macaroni came into play at this point, big time, because you were encouraged to have some meals during the week without meat. Here are more of those recipes that I don't want to try. Wonderful things to do with fruit cocktail and cornflakes. I've never considered it. I don't think I will now. No. Favorite recipe contests, and I have some of those in the next slide. Some of them were good, some of them were not, but it was a chance to contribute. Now we're into popular culture. Okay, this permeated everything. Stars were very useful for bond rallies, or if there was anything about your town that would, people get excited about, anyone that could draw in a crowd, that was a good thing. Read an article about a town in California where they captured a small sub there, and they used that sub. It was a Japanese sub that they took around and used it at war bond rallies. It was very popular, I guess. The cartoons that you saw at the beginning, it permeated everywhere. Comics, movies, everywhere. Was all about the war and how to win the war. As we know, it affected sports. We got the Women's Baseball League out of that. Anybody remembers seeing a league of their own? Very popular entertainment at the time, dance halls. There were a lot of things like dance marathons, contests, and it was a fantastic era for good music. And the themes were very often war-related. Superman, I believe, Captain America came up during this time period in the cartoons and comics. The movies of the time, there were a lot of those were also war-related. Another chance for participation was the canteens. There was a canteen next to the Stanley Theater, probably informal or formal when someone was coming through at the train station. Probably most train stations, a lot of the women's clubs provided sandwiches and hot coffee and company to the sailors, soldiers. I had an interesting story about a woman who was 16 years old. Her parents were the chaperones of the canteen, and what the girls would do, they would play cards and make sandwiches and so on for the soldiers. And she said that she met a young man there, made him a grilled cheese sandwich, and she continued to make him grilled cheese sandwiches for the rest of their lives. So, but they were chaperoned. People kept an eye on things, I would like to say that Clinton was one of the early adopters to raising funds. The Clinton Civic Group sponsored the Red Cross for $2,000 to contribute from Clinton. And now, we're going to get to the really interesting part. Yes, we are. We're going to really important stuff.
Thank you, Connie. So, starting with some rudimentary things such as air defense in the United States. Now we would certainly think of something like an invasion by Japan or Germany to be far-flung, but at the time, people were very concerned about exactly what might happen. And so everybody from every little town, big city, and every hamlet in between put up observation towers and a way to communicate with each other. The I was able to get from a person who attended one of my programs some photographs of, in this case, it happened to be Syracuse. This was the scene the night of April 27th, 1942, before a blackout exercise. And this is what it looked like afterwards. So 60 seconds after the first warning sounded. Everybody was on board. There was every little town, like I said, had an observation tower. Even Clinton had one up on, I think it's called the Mound or the Knoll. The Knob. Very good, thank you. In my little town of Oneida, there were observation towers set up on the top of schools, on the hills just outside of town, things like that. Connie had talked a little bit about the control over who could and should be out at various times. If there was a blackout, this happened to be the identification card for a nurse at the Children's Hospital in Rome. Everybody wanted to know who was who. The program that I got this from, the information I got this from, was from a GE electrician who was also into amateur radio. And of course, during ham radio, during this time, it was extremely popular way to communicate without tying up phone lines or other normal communications type of things. And a lot of people bonded together to form a civil defense group that was the War Emergency Radio Service. And these were, again, could be used in case telephones went down or radio programs were interrupted or something like that. And this was the material that I got from the grandniece of a Nathaniel Graves, and he was quite active in that movement out Syracuse way. And by the way, this is kind of an interesting time to mention this. If people have things that they don't know what to do with, it's best to hand them over to a local historical society, because all the stuff that you're seeing here in the next couple of slides would have been thrown in the trash. And that was, this grandniece was able to rescue these things and knew that somebody would be of interest to somebody. On the left there is the civilian protection program for Syracuse and Onondaga County. I gotta believe that there must have been something like that in the Utica area as well. On the far right there is a portable, rudimentary, early on radio, automobile based. And these became, just like so many other things in society, these groups became, this particular group became a fraternal group, so that people got together as an excuse for people to do something constructive, as Connie mentioned. She also mentioned the volunteer spirit of things. As you can see in the bottom left there is a civil defense rally, or muster, I guess you could say, of young people and old people as well. You had women volunteer, nursing, and you guys, I must say that some of these things I was able to procure from scrapbooks that are located right against the wall over there when I was working here for the Historical Society. So there's a wealth of information. So if you have things that you've kept, that's always a good source for passing it on. I can also tell you that when I was working here, the COVID happened. And one of the things that we tried to do was get people to bring in some mementos from that time. It was a bit of a hard slog because nobody wants to remember bad stuff, but it will become valuable if we relive everything one more time. So I urge you to sort of consider donating things to make a difference. Up here, as you can see, on the left is pretty much a kit of somebody who was working civil defense. a gas mask, some sort of noise-making device to get people's attention, a torch or a flashlight, and of course a helmet. I think you guys have some downstairs, if I remember correctly. And everybody got involved in the act, old, young, everybody in between. Here are some observation centers or observation locations, and you can see on the bottom left there is the Clinton, one of the rendering of the Clinton observation post. Up on the top there is the one from Liverpool. And the interesting thing about the picture on the right is that the two ladies are volunteering. That's obvious. But one thing that escapes you if you don't look at it right or deeply is the definitions up there. What's north, northeast. So if they spotted some questionable activity, they could phone it in to the authorities. Again, observation post was the newsletter, and you have some of those in your collection here that I kind of did a couple snapshots of. Some of the observation posts could be as elaborate or as rudimentary as you wanted. Here's somebody's sketch on the right of what one looked like in Elmira, and Dutchess County had kind of a modest one there. This is the control center at the Lowell building in Syracuse, and there is a air raid steam-driven siren at Krause Hines in Syracuse. Let's see. And there's, I talked about Oneida. This kind of caught my attention. I was going through some old news clippings. And the Board of Education in Oneida finally requested towards the end of the war that the shack that was on top of one of the elementary schools be taken down finally, as it wasn't needed. Everybody got involved in the act. Students learned identification of friend and foe of various aircraft. Here's an identification class being conducted. One of the things that you don't hear a lot about is the role of how we dealt with prisoners of war, both Italian and German. And I picked a picture from the upper left specifically because if you look closely at the train, it's a New York Central coach. People that, I guess some of the German soldiers said that they hadn't ridden on such lavish trains in their home country. I'm sure these weren't top grade for us at the time, but it shows you the relative austerity of some countries versus others. And they were used a lot, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner there, for substituting for local farm help, which had been conscripted or gone off to war. To bring in the crops, and also it's my understanding that a number of the silos in this area were built using POW labor. They had to build their own facilities. There's several accounts in the newspapers in the area about, in this case, Stacy Basin, Waterville, Rome, and Deansboro. Some of the they were used for labor, and it was, I mean, nobody wants to be held prisoner, but it was relatively good conditions given some of the conditions that our folks had to endure. Here's a only canning factory that happened to be located in Oneida. In fact, there was an interesting bit in the local newspaper about how there was going to be a POW camp at what was the Oneida Armory, but the Common Council ditched that idea. I never know you can say no to the federal government, but apparently they did. So, another thing that's always interested is the obscuring of manufacturing facilities using sleight of hand, eye sort of thing, so that you could see this particular one, a factory out in California, made probably aircraft manufacturing, that from the sky on the left there, you couldn't tell exactly how expansive it was, but underneath you could see through the netting on the top exactly how it was accomplished. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Rome Air Depot. Before it was Griffiths Air Force Base, it was Rome Army Airfield and Rome Air Depot. And I go into a great deal of this in a program that I'm giving on Wednesday coming up at the Rome Historical Society about 1941 to 47, the years of the establishment of Rome Army Airfield and Rome Air Depot before it became Griffiths in 1947. So if you're not doing anything Wednesday night, come on over. One of the purposes that they had at Rome was to refurbish aircraft and put them back out in the field, because much like you had to mend and make do with clothes, you had to do the same type of thing with the implements of war. And as Connie mentioned, women got involved either as WACs or WAFs or other expertise, even turning wrenches and whatnot, supplementing the workforce that again was going off to war. This I didn't realize until I started digging into things. Rhodes Army Hospital. How many of you knew about Rhodes Army Hospital? Okay. It was located approximately where Slocum-Dixon is now, Slocum-Dixon Medical Center and ConMed. But it was, I forget how many, I'm going to say there were like 70 different buildings involved. It was a major bone surgery center for any of our guys that were wounded overseas. And here is the actual, I was able to get the actual plan of what was what various locations, but it was a sprawling facility of which not much still exists. I think there's a couple of buildings that still exist, but they've been repurposed. Here are some inside shots of the Rhodes Air Army Hospital. Obviously a kind of recuperation type of shot there, phone area, library, so that the guys and gals that were injured would have a place to recuperate. And of course, the Utica area has always been very welcoming in terms of a refugee population, of which obviously there were quite a few. So the Utica government in the 1940s, Utica played a significant role in the war effort, not only societally but also business-wise. And perhaps one of the more prominent locations was General Electric, which at the time was on Broad Street, sprawling facility. They created radio tubes, and they employed 250 people. After the war, they expanded their operations, and eventually wound up in New Hartford at again the ConMed facility there now. But this is what they specialized during the war in. Bossert Manufacturing, which is no longer in existence, they specialize in shell casings and steel oxygen tanks. They received the Army-Navy Eat for Excellence, and there's some interesting statistics that I uncovered. They made 20 million cartridge cases, 300,000 pressed steel cylinders, and 14,000 axles for tanks. So Chicago Pneumatic, located on the south side of Utica, they had, among other things, they produced press, rivet press equipment and generators, which is right there. They also had one of the earliest Rosie the Riveter type of advertisements that happened. This happened to have been from a Chicago Pneumatic employee in, I believe it was Chicago, but became featured big time in the Saturday Evening Post. Now, you have to be careful when you're hiring women, because, you know, you don't know what could happen.
You're getting the evil eye from the back of the
Yeah.
room.
Okay. So, but it's just, this is the mindset, not at the right, not acceptable nowadays, but that was the thinking at the time. I just put that in, that was supposed to be humor. All right, Darwin Manufacturing created, they had a continuous cloth towel cabinet. The cabinet, known as the Standard, was square, made of steel, and eventually this was used they transferred their emphasis over to shell casings during the war. Of course, Savage Arms, it wouldn't be another thing like GE. Another thing that can't be not mentioned is Savage Arms. And not only did they create Thompson submachine guns for our troops, but for the Allies. That's why they have British Canadian folks there on the right-hand side. Here's some nice shots inside. This is obviously the completed Thompson submachine guns from Savage. And here's the diagram of the facility that encompassed the whole area in South Utica. So, Utica Cutlery, big on, obviously, cane bar knives, pocket knives, and they just went out of business. Unless am I remembering that right? They just closed or shuttered their door, but they created many different forms of knives, hunting knives, that sort of thing. Union Fork and Hoe down the valley, bayonets, let's see what other things here. Obviously, shovels. And here are some examples. This is probably a Marine kit that was strapped to the back of guys' backpacks. And the Vine brothers actually contributed a smoke obscuring equipment to help with troop movements, to keep the enemy from seeing exact movements. Brunner Company, Brunner Manufacturing, refrigeration units were used obviously for air conditioning and refrigeration. What I thought was kind of interesting, I think you actually found this, Connie, was and it's not a big thing, but somebody had to make all the emblems that were used during the war, the rank, the wings, the designations, the devices that the soldiers and sailors had on their uniforms. And there was one right here in Utica. And here's a picture of the ladies toiling in the emblem department. A little lighter side of things here. This was interesting. Apparently, one of the things that the Undertakers did was they, if somebody passed, they made sure that their rationing books were surrendered to the proper authorities, because they weren't going to use them anymore. Then, of course, you had, if you were doing any kind of spotting, this is a story out of St. Johnsville, where some spotters noticed some people going about unusual activity at night, and it turned out that they were stealing chickens. So they duly sent that information over to the police. And then you had a bunch of scouts that were out walking one day, and they were mistaken for enemy troops. I don't know how, but the fact that they were in a uniform maybe did it. Stiff racial penalties were imposed, as Connie had mentioned in some of her talks. The center picture there is a group of New Hartford Cub Scouts that they contributed to the war effort by having a scrap parade. And so it looks like the guy on the left was a convincing tin man of his time. Let's see here. Topic of interest. Most of the time in most venues was what you can do during the war to help with the effort. A little farther afield here, Oneida Limited became involved in both World War II and Korea, not only offering up their workers, but also for surgical instruments, bayonets. They even did bomb racks. And what I found interesting was that they also briefly got involved in making trailers. This was a portable photographic trailer that they developed. They were located, that was located at, in Canastota, and it was previously a bus manufacturing facility. But somehow, Night Limited got involved, took it over, and they also created and manufactured, and these are bomb loading carriers. And if you look real close, you can see the where it's made by Night Limited Canastota division, right there. They have state rack trucks was another thing. And other things outside this area, you had in Syracuse, you had crowd signs making airplane and ship signal lights. Again, radar systems at GE. Smith Corona made rifles. Syracuse, China made ceramic anti-tank mines, which comes in handy with if somebody's using a metal detector to find mines and it's ceramic, then that kind of foils their efforts. And so there's an example of the ceramic use. Another thing that was, here are the actual ceramic mines that were being produced. The New York ordinances works was located where Radisson is now. A newly developed bomb material called dunite or explosive D was used in the production of armor-piercing shells, which was instrumental in the Navy as well as Army. Here's a shot of their facility and one of the ladies pouring dunite into the warhead. As we wind down here a little bit, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about family. My great-grandfather, Laura right there, and his wife, Carolyn, on the far left, he ran Keller Ford Motor Company in Oneida and later Rome. But as you can see, everybody was involved in the effort. Upper left-hand corner is my Uncle Eli. In the center, and this is how I get involved in it, that's my grandmother, Norma. And on the far right is Bud, or Hugo Jr. But what's interesting about this was, in addition to doing the automobile sales, he was very much involved in creating innovations. This was their facility when it was downtown Oneida. And of course, it's now the location we eventually moved to Broad Street in Oneida. But they got the Utica, they got the Army Navy E Award for creating a plaster could be used in setting bones out in the field for brakes. And my great-grandfather also developed a series of help driving devices for amputees as a result of the war. All right, so I'm going to end things on a mystery for you. I don't know how many of you want some extra money, but this came to me by a gentleman I thought was a fascinating thing. I couldn't quite figure out where to put this, but I decided to put it at the end of this talk. The gentleman's name is Otto Helig, and he appears on the top of the cowling in the back there. Otto was a photographer, and he was one of these people who saw innovation. You know, most of us are kind of short-sighted. He could tell that if he used an airplane to do aerial photography, it, you know, he could make a business out of it. He was not a pilot himself, but he hired a Holger Harris to fly him around, and he's from the Catskill area, town of Liberty, and he created a business that was aerial photography. Here's his facility that he located in Liberty, and that building is still standing. And apparently he was a bit of a speed demon, so he liked airplanes, but he also liked fast cars. Here's some of his original photography, which I got from a historian who gave them to me and he's quite a good photographer. And he and his pilot also set a record by flying between the United States and Europe. And that's his plane, the Liberty. Well, so during the war, there was a lot of German sympathizers. And they got wind of the fact that Otto had this business he was running, and they sort of, I guess you could say, they had heard that he was going down to New York City. So they got on the plane with him, and his pilot and he were in the front. They knew that they were going to kill both him and his pilot, so they started talking about their plans. They had a whole lot of money with them, and they were going to go down and buy explosives to blow up some bridge structures, some key bridge structures on a railroad in the Hudson Valley. Well, they got a little full of themselves, and Otto and his pilot sort of realized that neither one of them of the hostage takers were strapped in the back. So Otto and the pilot kind of made eye contact with each other, and Otto went looking in the corner of the pocket where they kept the revolver. He signaled to his pilot to do an evasive maneuver through the saboteurs around in the back, and apparently Otto shot them and killed them. Okay, so when they got to where they were going, they turned over the dead saboteurs, but they didn't necessarily turn over all the money. Okay, they made a pact amongst the two of them that they would use the money, however much remained, for good deeds. And to this day, the money has not been recovered. So if you want, I'd be happy to give you the clues that Otto left behind when he passed. And if you got a couple of decades that you want to see if you can go down and find the money. Apparently, if you solve the riddle, 25 questions long, the money is in a safety deposit box somewhere. This is true. This is an actual true story, and it's relayed by Bob Jenner, who did the heavy lifting. I just copied his content. I want to thank Jen Bailey for her information from Nathaniel Graves, Matt Ertz from the Keller Lab for the Keller Labs information, Tony Gianti for the Otto Helix stuff, Bob Jenner, the United County History Center, the Clinton History Historical Society, and my wife Connie. So,
I would like to invite you to try a recipe that has been in my family for a long time. It does have raisins in it. Somebody said, well, weren't they? I saved them for the special occasion. So there's raisins. And the eggs are from my neighbor. So I'm in the theme. So please enjoy a taste.
Well, thank you for your time and attention. Yeah, to hold on a second here, go ahead, yeah.
I just, you mentioned the spotters, the observation posts.
Yeah.
Were any enemy aircraft ever spotted?
No, it seemed to be mostly the chicken thieves and stuff
The
like
question
that.
about them killing those 2 saboteurs, wasn't that dangerous because you're in a confined area in an airplane? Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, yeah, that was, but I guess if you knew that their plans had been expressed, that they were gonna off you anyways,
Right.
and it was not a matter of altitude, because it was a flimsy plane, it was probably.
I mean,
just-
they had to shoot to kill them, but it's such a small space, they didn't worry about anything ricocheting off.
Apparently
Must
not.
have been a good shot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, once you threw them around, you got the
So
gun.
you have to know where to shoot.
Yeah, exactly, no, you're right, it would seem like a.
How do they know the other people wouldn't shoot back?
Well, they apparently were so discombobulated by being thrown around the plane.
Oh, okay, so they were gonna do it.
I mean, there's a risk in everything. So, much like we had you brought into the experience with mood setting propaganda piece, we'll take you out, if I can get this to work, with a little music.
Oh.
Thank you for your time.